Thank you very much, and it's a real honour and pleasure to be here. We've had the thinking orthopaedic surgeon, which is Dave. Now you've got the non-thinking, passionate orthopaedic surgeon, a different type of person. I'm going to start and finish with headline. And this is where we were throughout England and the whole of Britain just 5 to 10 years ago. All of the orthopaedic surgeons in the room knew that this was happening to their patients. They knew it was wrong. All of our nurses, our physiotherapists, even our managers knew it was wrong. But we couldn't improve it. For everybody, there was a good reason why we could not improve care for elderly patients with fractures. So I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes on how to change things in the NHS. And for those of you who have been in it long enough, you'll appreciate that this is a difficult subject because it doesn't like change. So you start with an idea. And it's probably right to say that it's an ideal in this man's case. And the ideal needs intelligence, it needs dedication, it needs leadership, it needs common sense. I don't think I've ever heard Dave say something that isn't commonsensical. And of course, for his children, he needs to be a pretty good-looking bloke too. As we've heard, he needs mates. He needs mates from different specialties to make things work. These are orthogeriatricians. My God, physicians and surgeons working together. And they work together very hard to create this, which is the next important thing you need for change, which is data. Hard facts to present before your peers and the politicians. The third thing you need is an absolute must, and that is power. You need an important person, Keith Willett's here today, I'm not sucking up to him, who's in power, who can influence those in legislation. But as we know, what you write in the law book, particularly in the NHS, doesn't mean what actually happens in reality. Just writing the law does not change behaviour. And finally, the fourth magic ingredient to change, money. Money makes the world go around. So how did Dave make his idea and his ideal work? Well, he started on this road by setting professional standards. Again, a rare event, professional standards agreed between a group of physicians and a group of surgeons. These set for us audit standards, standards we could measure against, and then he helped develop the National Hip Fracture Database, which has allowed us to check those audit standards. Dave is undoubtedly one of the founding fathers of the Hip Fracture Database, and it worked because he used common sense. He started simply and locally where he knew he could win. So he took existing hip fracture databases in some of the major cities and small towns around the country, combined them, and this evolved over a 2-year period into national recruitment. Currently, every single hospital in England admitting patients with hip fractures contributes to this. That is a massive achievement. Over 5,000 patients a month get increased. This database already has 188,000 patients in it. It is the largest registry in the world. We all hear in medicine about level 1 evidence, all the trials we hear about. Well, this is level 1 epidemiological evidence. This is evidence what happens to the entire population of England when they get in the hands of orthopaedic surgeons. So I'm going to review just briefly some of the results from this, and my colleagues will touch on other points later. These look really complicated slides that are hard to read. They're hard to read for a reason. I was shaking slightly when I took the pictures. I don't want you to read them, but they give you a general gist of the trend. This is all of the hospitals in the country. Each hospital is named, but not each surgeon. I think ultimately maybe it will be, but for the moment that is working because it encourages people to join. They don't feel exposed and naked in front of the Daily Telegraph. The other important thing is that our data collection nationally is pretty good, and at the bottom we can see that about 95% of our units overall are producing good data. This is quite a startling thing. This is the average age of a patient in England having a hip fracture. You can see that 50% of our patients are over 80. That translates to around 30 to 35,000 patients each year. It's a lot of patients. What about the process of care? We're starting to measure that now. Well, here's the amount of time from an elderly patient hitting the emergency room to getting on the orthopaedic ward with painkillers and in comfort. And you can see there's a huge variation in the country, which I think you as taxpayers are entitled to ask why. In some hospitals, at the bottom, you only 20% of patients get to the ward within 4 hours. Whereas in other hospitals, it's 95%. 20%. That is a complete disgrace. I can say it, but Keith can't. My hospital, I'm pleased to say, is up there, because the beauty of this is that I am open and people can see what's happening. What about how quickly you get your operation? We saw in the headline that long delays are bad for patients. That's true. In some hospitals, again, 20% of patients get to surgery within 36 hours. In some hospitals, it's 90% plus. What would you want for your father, for your mother? My hospital is bang in the middle of the field, but improving. This is another interesting thing. This is for orthopaedic surgeons. This is how we fix fractures. And these are the fractures Dave showed some of, which are treated with hip screws. And here we can see quite a miracle. Because in Britain, the orthopods are doing the right thing. They're practicing evidence-based surgery and following nice guidelines. If I was presenting this in America, the figures would be reversed. 80% get treated with an intramedullary nail, despite no evidence and no guidelines to say that's the right thing to do. Why? Because in America, surgeons get paid $100 more if they do a nail than a plate. So in America, the surgeons are following the dollar, not the guidelines or the evidence. Here's another example. These are fractures of the hip where they're inside the capsule of the joint. And this is what's happening in the UK at the moment. And you can see this is a very different graph than many we've seen. It's splattered all over the place. There's huge variations. But overall, for a fracture that's undisplaced, over 40% of patients are having a joint replacement. Joint replacement has an 8% mortality. Fixing it with screws has a 2% mortality. So here's an example of orthopaedic surgeons not practicing evidence-based medicine and not following nice guidelines. The graph is all over the place. Now, I mentioned that money is important. Why is money important? Money is important in translating the evidence that we've seen, some of which has been applied and some of which hasn't, into practice. And that has been incredibly successful by a thing called the best practice tariff. And what happened, and this was fairly unique and the first time it's happened, is that 6 key standards were set by the profession led by Dave and by Finbar and Colin, orthopaedic surgeons and geriatricians together, that all patients should have an admission protocol. All patients should have joint care between an orthogeriatrician and an orthopaedic surgeon. All patients should have their surgery within 36 hours. They should all have a rehabilitation assessment and something to try and prevent them falling again. And they should all have something to try and stop them having another fracture. Now, most of you are confused. The orthopaedic surgeons are happy, but I did say there were 6, and that's only 5. The most important standard, number 6, is that these standards were to be monitored using the audit database. If you achieve all 6 standards in each individual patient, then your hospital gets extra money. And for the first year, it was just £440 per patient. For the second year, it doubled, and this year, it's doubled again. Now, my hospital treats 800 of these patients per year. So that means this amount of additional income comes in. We've now got numbers, money, that my hospital manager will listen to. My hospital managers are good people, but the trust board didn't even know that fractures of the hip were being treated in our hospital, really. Now, every month at the trust board, they get a report on how we're doing based on these key standards, which are clinical standards, backed up, which is important for the managers, by the money. So money talks. Has it made any difference? It's made an amazing difference. These are the 6 key performers. Hard to read, but you can see that for 5 of the 6, there has been a massive national upward trend over the last 2 years. But for the most important one of all, which is mortality at 30 days, there has been a 12% reduction in mortality within 2 years nationally. That is an absolutely remarkable figure. Having audit and money together is a powerful tool for making things change. We started with this headline, and we've moved to this: huge improvements of standards. I'm going to forget science. I'm now a news editor. If you look at those numbers, and the trend is continuing at the moment, if we achieve, as I think we will, a reduction in mortality of 10% to 7%, with these things that have been instituted, that will equate to 2,000 patients leaving hospital alive per year extra. I think the headline writer will write this. Thank you.